Hello, everyone, YouTube family. My name is Greg, and this is Word on the Street from a Veteran. Okay, it's good to see you guys today. All right, we're going to be talking about one word today, and I'm just going to talk about what that means to you. But before we start today's episode, make sure you like, subscribe, and comment. Remember, we was talking about the comments, good or bad, what things I can improve on to make me better. I sure do appreciate for all those that are supporting me thus far, and hopefully, I, want to continue to grow my fan base. Okay. All right. So today is a lovely day in Thailand. Today's date is the 8th of July and 2025. And just a beautiful day. Yesterday was my run morning. Tomorrow's my run morning. I'm going to go to the gym later on today. All right. So, look, today I want to talk about something today that I think it's very, very important that we need to hit on today. I want to talk about the word gamble, like gambling. Okay. First, let's break down the word, right? Gamble. Look it up in dictionaries. There's various definitions of it. But I wrote down a definition. I'm going to read verbatim. Okay. To gamble is to do something that involves risk and could fail, but that you hope will succeed or make money to bet on an uncertain outcome. Okay. There are other meanings. It's an act of gambling, enterprise, undertaking, or attempted with the risk of loss and a chance of profit or profit or success. Okay. Look, I remember when I was a kid, right? Share a story with you guys, right? Um, I was a kid. I was probably like 12 or 11, maybe about, I think say 10 to about 14. My mom used to go play bingo, right? Now, I'm gonna get a little old school with this. Now, remember, I'm 42, right? So my mom used to play bingo, right? And so they used to have, well, they still have it nowadays, but not as much. They had the bingo parlors, and back then you was able to smoke. So we're talking about the early days. It ain't like now where you can't really hardly smoke anywhere in any buildings, anywhere in the world. But I'm talking as far as the United States, where it's allowing you to smoke. Now, if you bring a kid nowadays into a smoky bingo parlor, somebody might call child CPS on you or something like that. But times were different back then. All right, so we go to this bingo parlor, and I would come just watch my mom play, and they had the bingo dabbers, and have a bingo card, and I'm gonna tell you about the demographic what I would see. Right, so I would see like a lot of elderly women and men. I didn't understand it then, but now as a grown man, a grown adult, who knows? They probably could have been gambling, their social security check. I mean, who knows, right? Doesn't matter, right? So, anyways, I get into this bingo parlor, and it's smoky in there. I mean, you see a lot of elderly with oxygen tanks, and I'm thinking, man, that could be dangerous. You could possibly blow somebody up in here, right? So, anyways, whenever bingo was called, you hear bingo, bingo, bingo. Possible. And possible meant that you had a possible bingo, right? So in there, I'm a little kid just breathing all this different type of smokes, Barbaros and Cools and Virginia Slims and Newports. There's some old guy out there with a fedora on. He's got some type of cigar, just wiping out the whole thing, right? Just gambling. You know what I mean? Now look, I don't know. Maybe that's taught me as a kid. Gambling, when you're gambling for something like money, it's the risk. It's a risk, right? It's a risk. I mean, you can win or not win. It's like the hope. It's the hope of that, right? Now, look, I've been to, as an adult, I've been to various casinos. I've been to Las Vegas. Las Vegas, I guess, is a every, once a year trip everybody must take. I've been to Vegas, and the way those casinos are set up is the house always wins. Do people win? Yes, they do. But the more you stay, if they can get you there longer, if as long as you're drinking, you drink for free, eventually you can run out of money. People will come back. Sometimes you might win $3,000, but your flight might not leave until 2 days later. So you might be done for the night, but guess what? 2 nights later, you giving all that 3,000 back. Vegas is pretty much an experience. It's more just about gambling. You have uh, what's that famous dam, the Hoover Dam. You got various shows, but really a lot of people go to gamble. Okay, and there's nothing wrong with gambling. Okay, all right. I know one time, they tried to get on Michael Jordan because they tried to say he had a gambling addiction. I mean, look, it, he had to come out in an interview and say, look, it's not hindering my family. My family is not in need. It's just something I can do, and I'm within my legal rights to do that, right? Um, but why are we talking about gambling today? Why is it so important today? Why talk about this? I'm in Thailand. I could talk about traveling and everything. How does all this tie in? Okay, I'm gonna tell you how it ties in, right? Well, first of all, let's talk about for those of us that's working. Okay, there was a point in time, back in the day where companies had pensions, right? And how I got this education, a good friend of mine, I'm not going to mention his name, we came up in the army together. He educated me on a lot of this. I had to look up a lot of this myself. Pensions, right? If you work for maybe 20 and 30 years with a company, what happens is every check that you had a certain amount that go in your pension, which is basically your retirement fund, right? So you work for this company, the company will hold it for you. After that, you cash in your pension. You enjoy your pension, you live out your retirement days and you're good, right? So what happened over time is companies stopped offering that. Now there's still a few companies that have that, especially in the private sector. But what happened since the 1980s on, it was lower. It was kind of like projected lower. You can look at the numbers, but what I'm saying is pensions kind of went away. They kind of went away from pensions and got into 401ks. Okay, 401ks is actually supposed to be supplemental to pensions. But eventually, when they did away with pensions, because the big time corporations, they begged the government, to borrow money. Actually, they begged the government to do away with pensions, right? So 401k. So now you hear people say, "Hey, make sure you put a little money in your 401k. Put a little money in your 401k," right? Here's how they get you, right? I remember when I worked for Bridgestone Tire Plant. I worked there for 2 years, right? After I got out of the military, and great company. I mean, it's owned by the Japanese. I liked everything about the organization. I mean, when you come from the military, no matter what military you serve in the world, you know, uh, when you go to a different corporation, it's like, man, can something match that? And I got to be honest with you, I loved everything about Bridgestone. I like the way that I was welcomed into there. It was a two-part interview, everything, right? Well, Bridgestone was so good that they didn't even have a union. The benefits were just that great. And in fact, the medical benefits, when you first start with most jobs, right, you got to work a 90-day or six month grace period, right? The medical benefits start the day that you start, even in orientation. That's how great Bridgestone was, right? But let me get on the 401k. So most companies, right, which this was a plan, they'll match whatever you're putting in. That's an incentive of saying, hey, we'll match you at 5% or 6%. So most people say, okay, well, I'm gonna dump money into that, right? Okay, so here's where gambling comes into play, right? Here's what a lot of us we don't know, we're just not aware, right? So on that gambling tip, right? You got money coming out of 401k, 401k, because you want to save, for a rainy day, right? You want to save for tomorrow in the future, right? Well, here's what a lot of us don't know. Well, there's a broker that we don't know, right? We don't even know who the stockbroker is. They're taking your money that you work hard for, all the overtime, all the blood, sweat, and tears, no matter what job it is, being the plant, office work, doesn't matter what it is. All that money goes to a stockbroker who you don't know, who's gambling your money in the stock market. Sometimes it can go up, sometimes it can go down. But remember, I'll go back to the definition, right? The definition, right, to do something that involves risk and could fail, but that you hope will succeed or make money to bet on certain or uncertain outcome. Okay. Sometimes you'll see your 401k like, man, I made a lot this month, right? And then the next month it can go down, right? Everything's based off the stock market, right? Doesn't matter what it is. The stock market is what it is. This video is not about that. I'm not trying to get into particulars on the job. If you still got money going on 401k, continue to put it in there. I'm just telling you about how this ties in today's video, right? Gambling, okay? Like I said, I've been to Vegas, did a lot of gambling out there and, had some fun and, broke even, went with a good friend of mine, we've known each other for over 25 years, came up together in the military and we went out there, we had a great time, right? But today, let's talk about when it comes to gamble on yourself, okay? Gamble on yourself, all right? Take that leap of faith forward for yourself. I don't care how old you are. You could be from a young man, young woman, all the way to the elderly. Take a gamble on yourself, okay? There's nothing wrong with that. Now let me go back to the 401k, right? Let's say you had the 401k for a couple of years, and maybe you need to take some money out, for whatever reason, maybe trying to buy a house or that boat or um, doesn't matter, right? Well, they'll have you thinking that, hey, if you take this money out, you'll be penalized, right? You got to wait for so many years to take that money out, right? Meanwhile, you don't even know that stockbroker that's, gambling your money every month, right? But here's the thing. If you want to take that leap of faith in yourself, let's say you want to start a side business, right? For yourself. Why not take the money that you've been paying into, take some money out of your 401k to start that business, right? Let's say you want to travel the world. Why not do that, right? Look, the days of working 30 and 40 and 50 years, right? And then enjoying your retirement when you're damn near 70, 80 years old, those days are over with. Okay. There are other ways, even coming from COVID. I think COVID taught us to have multiple streams of income, and I think that's a good thing, right? But, if you're in that mindset where say, you know what, I want to take a little bit out of my 401k because I want to start this business, gamble on yourself. What greater risk than yourself? Take a gamble on yourself. Now, how's this tied to traveling, right? Look, let's take it back for a second. Take it back to when you was in your 20s, right? You're around with the fellas or the ladies or whatever, and you want to take a trip, and everybody says, "Hey, we're going to take this trip. We're all going to take on this trip, right?" And so everybody plans it. You might be out drinking one night, and you say you want to take a trip. Let's say you want to go to the Bahamas or something like that, right? But what ends up happening when it gets closer to the date? Money. Somebody always falls out and says, "Hey, I don't have enough money at this time," or "I just can't go," or "My job, I don't have enough vacation days to go. I don't have enough time to go." So now you might have all that. You might have the time, the money, the resources. You have all that. Sometimes it's okay to leave friends and family behind because sometimes when we travel, we gotta travel like 3 or 4 people. Now, I would caution ladies. I always say travel with at least one person because you never know. These days everything's at a risk, right? But what I'm saying is, if you've got the means to do it, to travel, especially to a place like this in Thailand or Cambodia or whatever, do that. Take a gamble on yourself. There's nothing wrong with that. Gambling on yourself that's what life's all about. When I took a leap of faith and I joined the military, it wasn't because of my father, because he joined. I gambled on myself, right? With the hope to succeed. I succeeded for as far as I can go. Then I left. But you gamble on yourself. I don't care what it is in life. Take a gamble on yourself. There's nothing wrong with that. See, nobody wants to talk about that. What people will talk about is if you're around people that are always very negative and telling you what not to do, then you might want to surround yourself around people that are positive. People that can benefit you with information and share knowledge with you. That's what you want to do. That's why I always encourage, if you're younger, hang out with someone that's a little bit older, that's kind of been there in life. Like the uncles or the grandpas. Mom and dad. That's the most greatest resource of all. Your mom and dad, whatever guardian raised you, or anything like that. But when you're out on your own, there's nothing wrong with taking a gamble on yourself. Gamble on yourself. Like I said, it's fun to go to the Las Vegas and gamble for money and anything like that. But gambling for yourself, especially when it comes to travel, take that risk. I always tell you in videos before about basically getting yourself in tune with travel groups and looking on YouTube and asking people, that's boots on ground and saying, "Hey, what's it like in this country?" That's great, right? But take a leap of faith on yourself. Sometimes you might have to leave 5 or 6 of those friends behind, who may not have it there. That's fine. But take a gamble on yourself. Go. Then when you go, I don't care if it's the next country over. I don't care if you're in the United States, you go to Mexico. If you're in Europe, if you're in Germany, you go right there to Paris. Take a gamble on yourself. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay? Don't let anybody tell you that there's something wrong with that. That, hey, you got to save this much money. Yes, you do got to save to travel. Yes, that is true. I'm not saying go travel and be broke or anything like that. Have a plan. Have a plan, a backup plan, a backup plan. But if you're already in that, right? You saved enough. You've worked hard. You make the sacrifice. Do it. There's nothing wrong with that. Do it. There's nothing wrong with that. Right now, I'm over here. I'm trying to reset in life. You know what I mean? Doesn't mean I'm going to be in Thailand forever, but it's a great start. And like I said, these videos, I'm not sharing. I'm not trying to sell you on Thailand. I'm just trying to tell you, if you travel, take that leap of faith on yourself. Okay. So, like I said, gambling is great. When you're doing it for money and profit. But remember, it's a hope to succeed. And if you have a hope to succeed with an uncertainty, why not do it on yourself? How are you going to know if you don't try it? Look, there's an old saying. I would rather try and fail than to fail to try. I'd rather try. At least if I tried, if I'm on that weight bench and I'm going up in weight, let's say I got 315, 415, or whatever, I'd rather try and fail than to fail to try. How are you gonna know if you don't try? But if you fail to try, what are you gonna tell yourself? Look, when I was a recruiter, Army recruiter, right? There were people that couldn't join for whatever reason. Maybe that the test score wasn't too, they didn't score enough, high enough on the test, or medically they couldn't join. And it used to kind of make me a little mad because I'm like, man, here's a person that wants to join, but yet I got to go out here and beg some person who has the test scores, who is physically qualified, but I have to convince them. But here's this person that's trying to join, but yet they can't get over that test, or they can't get over that medical. But this is what I would tell them. I said, listen, in life, 10 years from now, you look back, what could you tell yourself? They said, what's that, Sarge? At least you tried. You tried to join. But for whatever reason, you just couldn't get over the test, you couldn't get over that medical, but you tried. All right. But if I said, let's do it again. Let's say it's 10 years from now and you never came to this recruiting station, how would you have known? You'd have always wondered, man, I could have joined, but I didn't. Try. There's nothing wrong with that. I'd rather try and fail than to fail to try. Okay, so today's video is just talking. It's about gambling, but basically take a gamble on yourself because there's nothing wrong with that. All right. Well, that's it. That's it for today's episode. Once again, my name is Greg, and this is Word on the Street from a Veteran. And make sure you like, subscribe, and comment. I don't care if it's good or bad, or good or things I can improve on. It's gonna make me better. Okay, that's it for today's episode, and I hope that you have a great day. And once again, thank whoever you pray to, whoever you pray to, that you got another day on this earth. Even if you're atheist, doesn't matter. All right, just thank somebody that you got another day on this earth. Okay, I'm Greg, and I'm signing off. Bye.